Good evening. It's Wednesday, the 7th of May. As India launches a series of what it calls surgical strikes well inside Pakistani territory, Islamabad is vowing to respond. Tonight, we'll go into the heart of this conflict with reporters on the ground and analysis from experts, with the main question being, will there be a serious escalation? I'm Girish Sawlani, and you're watching The World. Well, the death toll is rising as tensions flare between the two nuclear-armed states of India and Pakistan as the world watches on with concern. Here are the latest developments. Pakistan is reporting at least 26 people have been killed in airstrikes and artillery exchanges, while India says at least 3 people have been killed in attacks by Pakistan. The government in Islamabad says India has struck 6 locations within the country and Pakistan-administered Kashmir, including 2 mosques. India says it struck 9 sites that it claims were terrorist camps and training facilities linked with 2 Islamist terrorist groups. It says these strikes are in retaliation for an April 22nd attack on Indian tourists in the town of Pahalgam, where militants shot dead 26 people. India says it also acted to prevent further planned attacks.
These actions were measured, non-escalatory, proportionate and responsible. They focused on dismantling the terrorist infrastructure and disabling terrorists likely to be sent across to India.
Islamabad claims it has shot down 5 Indian fighter jets and a drone. It's called the strikes cowardly and a blatant act of war.
Pakistan reserves the right and will respond to this aggression at a time, place and means of our own choice.
Well, the latest developments have drawn international concern. China, which shares land borders with both India and Pakistan, is calling on the countries to exercise restraint.
China finds India's military operation early this morning regrettable. We're concerned about the ongoing situation. India and Pakistan will always be each other's neighbours that cannot move away. They're both China's neighbours as well. China opposes all forms of terrorism.
Well, earlier today, US President Donald Trump said he was hopeful that the conflict between India and Pakistan would end quickly.
No, it's a shame. We just heard about it just as we were walking in the doors of the Oval. Just heard about it. I guess people knew something was going to happen based on a little bit of the past. They've been fighting for a long time. You know, they've been fighting for many, many decades and centuries, actually, if you really think about it. No, I just hope it ends very quickly.
The UN Secretary General is urging de-escalation as India and Pakistan weigh their next move in Kashmir. In a statement, Antonio Guterres said he is very concerned about India's military operations across the line of control and has called for maximum military restraint from both countries. There was concern even before these airstrikes began. Speaking shortly before India's latest action, the Secretary General offered UN support to pursue peace.
I understand the raw feelings following the awful terror attack in Pahalgam on 22 April. I once again strongly condemn that attack and extend my condolences to the families of the victims. Targeting civilians is unacceptable, and those responsible must be brought to justice through credible lawful means. It is also essential, especially at this critical hour, to avoid a military confrontation that could easily spin out of control. Now is the time for maximum restraint and stepping back from the brink. That has been my message in my ongoing outreach with both countries. Make no mistake, a military solution is no solution. And I offer my good offices to both governments in the service of peace. The United Nations stands ready to support any initiative that promotes de-escalation, diplomacy, and the renewed commitment to peace.
Well, a senior Pakistani general says the country will respond to Indian strikes at a time, place and means of its own choice. So what can we expect in the coming hours and days? Brahma Chellaney is a professor of strategic studies at the Center for Policy Research in New Delhi, and he joins me now. Good to have you with us this evening. Now, the first question I do want to ask you is, India has launched these strikes. Can we expect more from India?
The ball is in Pakistan's court. There will be a response from Pakistan for sure. After all, Pakistan's military generals, who are the de facto rulers of the country, they need to save face, and they will respond. At that point, India will have to decide whether it should respond to the response or let matters go. That would be a critical decision for India.
Yes, so what do you think the Prime Minister Modi would do in that scenario?
It's difficult to guess, but today India's patience has worn thin. For decades now, Pakistan has been waging proxy war by terrorism, using terrorists as surrogates. No country can be expected to put up with an adversary's undeclared war. India is now turning up the pressure for accountability. There is national consensus in India, which is quite rare because India is a very polarized country, a democracy where pro-Modi and anti-Modi forces are quite vehemently opposed to each other. And yet today, both sides are demanding that the government impose tangible costs on Pakistan. I think the path forward lies in the hands of the Pakistani rulers, which is to end the export of terrorism and see the relationship with India become mutually beneficial.
And of course, many people are watching this from afar, like here in Australia, and of course are aware that both India and Pakistan are nuclear-armed countries. As far as nuclear weapons are concerned, will this be a no-go zone for either country?
Well, first, in the bigger picture, it's not just India and Pakistan. China and Pakistan are close allies. They're both nuclear armed. So it's a nuclear triangle. And the threat that India faces is not coming from Pakistan alone. China has consistently provided diplomatic, strategic, and military cover for Pakistan, including for its export of terrorism, including repeatedly blocking UN sanctions against top Pakistani terrorists. And after the latest massacre in India, which created this present crisis, China has again come to Pakistan's rescue by rushing new weapon systems and describing Pakistan as an all-weather strategic partner. India has called Pakistan's nuclear bluff in the past. For example, in 2019, India carried out an airstrike deep inside Pakistan. It called Pakistan's nuclear bluff. It left a deep hole in the nuclear shield behind which Pakistan sponsors cross-border terrorism. And today's strikes again have called Pakistan's nuclear bluff. I don't think the conflict will become nuclear because Pakistan lacks strategic depth. Its narrow waistline precludes Pakistan from using any nuclear weapons against India. And India has a no first use policy. So India will not be the first to introduce nuclear weapons.
Yes. Now, these are not new in terms of surgical strikes conducted by India. We saw them in 2019, 2016, and somewhere in between as well. Does this one feel different to you?
It feels different because, first, the extent of the strikes that we saw early this morning, we have not seen in the past. Also, in response to the massacre of Hindu tourists on April 22nd, India took some measures, including putting the Indus Waters Treaty in abeyance. International law is very clear that when a treaty's foundational conditions collapse or one party persistently violates the terms of a treaty, the other party has the right to suspend or withdraw from the treaty. But for now, India has stopped short of blowing up the Indus Waters Treaty. Instead, it has placed the treaty on hold, in abeyance, a term which is not defined in international law. In other words, India is retaining a posture of strategic ambiguity. And this action of India does not, of course, disrupt water flows to Pakistan, because India lacks the hydrological infrastructure to reduce water flows to Pakistan. But it sends a warning to Pakistan: either reform your conduct or risk the collapse of the treaty. And I think that, again, is a major new element in the current situation.
Yes, and then finally, there is a lot of back and forth in terms of the disputes over Pakistan's involvement in the Pahalgam attack. India says it supported the militants behind it. But does India have strong evidence to present to the international community to justify this past action and future actions?
This is not the first major act of terrorism sponsored by Pakistan. There have been horrific acts of terrorism that have been scripted by Pakistan's rogue intelligence agency known as ISI. For example, the Mumbai massacre of 2008. In response to the Mumbai massacre, India sent dossiers of evidence to Pakistan, and nothing happened. And Pakistan's fingerprints in the Mumbai massacre were clear to the international community. In fact, the latest massacre in Pahalgam occurred very shortly after the US extradited to India a key US-based plotter of the Mumbai attacks, a person who had actually worked in the Pakistan army. And also, when there was an attack on Modi's watch in Pathankot, India allowed Pakistan's intelligence agency to come to Pathankot to investigate its own attack. Even that kind of accommodation did not result in a change in Pakistan's behavior. So providing dossiers of evidence, as India has done in the past, has not changed Pakistan's behavior. And that is the reason why, finally, India has employed the military option reluctantly.
Okay, Brahma Chellaney, really appreciate your analysis with us tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's get more on how these events have unfolded from our correspondent, Meghna Bali.
Explosions ring out in Pakistan's northeast.
We heard 5 or 6 blasts over there. After this, panic spread amongst the people.
Residents in the disputed border region of Kashmir evacuated and streets cordoned off. Eyewitnesses describing intense shelling and gunfire.
Suddenly, a very loud explosion happened, and then another one. The missile landed in the centre of the area where we live.
Pakistani officials say India struck several sites in the part of Kashmir it administers, as well as in Punjab, which is inside Pakistan and is not contested territory.
India has attacked civilian targets, including a mosque and residential accommodation.
Pakistan's leader condemned the attack, calling it cowardly and vowing to respond decisively. The Indian army posted, "Justice is served."
Right now, the big story is that
Its operation codename is Sindoor, a reference to the women widowed after militants killed 26 people in Indian-controlled Kashmir last month. The worst attack on civilians in the region in years. India blames the attack on Pakistan and says it strikes targeted infrastructure used by militants. The two sides were exchanging artillery fire near the line of control as the UN called for restraint. Tension as they risk all-out war in this decades-old conflict.
And Meghna Bali now joins us from New Delhi for the very latest. Meghna, Pakistan is pledging to respond to India's missile strikes. Is the situation expected to escalate from where you are in New Delhi?
Yeah, look, Girish, things are not looking good right now. They are in a dangerous position. As you've heard today, just earlier from your experts, things have only escalated in the hours since India has struck those 9 sites in Pakistan. Now, India has defended itself in a press briefing, just a few hours ago, and they've said that they were only targeting terror camps, that they were not after civilians, nor were they after any military infrastructure. Now, Pakistan has come out in the meantime, as you've heard, and said that they will be considering this assault an act of terror. And they, reserve the right to respond in any means that they see fit in terms of the timing and the mode of that. And what we've also heard over this last couple of hours is that a National Security Committee, chaired by Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, they've said that, these Indian strikes were carried out on the false pretext of the presence of imaginary terrorist camps. They've also said that, Pakistan reserved the right to respond in self-defense, and that the armed forces have now been authorized to take corresponding actions to avenge, what they're calling a violation of the country's sovereignty. So things are very hot right now. Meanwhile, we're seeing skirmishes, or rather open artillery fire on that disputed border of Kashmir, that de facto border called the line of control. We're seeing heavy civilian casualties on both sides. Pakistan has come out and said they've had some, almost 30 deaths. On the Indian side, we're looking at around 10, and there's children involved in this. So, this is a very human cost to these escalations between these nuclear armed neighbours.
Yes, and of course you are there in New Delhi. What's the mood like there? I mean, because we have been hearing by and large that these strikes have been supported by, across the board politically, but what's the mood on the ground like?
Look, yeah, we need to understand what the context here is, right? As you've mentioned, this response by India was in the wake of the deadliest, attack on civilians that has happened on Indian soil in almost 20 years, since those 26/11 Mumbai attacks. Now, Prime Minister Narendra Modi was under an immense amount of pressure here to act, to uphold that strongman image, but also to defend, quote unquote, the honor of India, the honor of the women who were widowed. That's why this operation is called Operation Sindoor, this mark of Indian women, in married Indian women. And so, people in India, as what we've been hearing, are happy. We're seeing firecrackers being burst, in the state of Uttar Pradesh. Lots of people glad that, Pakistan was given a response to, one of the deadliest massacres to happen here. And, especially if you consider, this projection of normalcy that Narendra Modi and the BJP government had projected in Kashmir, especially since the abrogation of Article 370, getting rid of that special status of this disputed region, controversially, some may say, but that image was shattered in last month's terror attack.
Okay, Meghna Bali in New Delhi, thank you so much for that update.
Thank you.
And as Meghna mentioned right there, this conflict is far from the first between India and Pakistan. Violence between the nuclear-armed states has repeatedly erupted over decades of tense relations. But history shows it doesn't have to last.
The 1947 partition of India and Pakistan drew a crude line through families, communities and religions. That resentment has persisted and repeatedly escalated, most of all in the divided region of Kashmir. By 1999, with both countries having acknowledged their nuclear capabilities, the conflict took on new stakes. A Pakistani incursion across the disputed line of control spiralled into months of fighting and hundreds killed on both sides. But peace prevailed as the millennium came to a close, back from the brink of full-scale war.
These intrusions have now been evicted, and there is no Pakistani presence on the Indian territory.
Again in 2014, the line of control was punctured by paramilitary violence, sparking outrage and accusations across the border, but far fewer deaths. The skirmishes came shortly after Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi took power for the first time on a Hindu nationalist platform. Approaching another election 5 years later, the military under Modi's administration would launch an airstrike on an alleged militant camp in Pakistan. Much like the latest aggression, India's action came in response to militant killings on its soil and saw aircraft downed in the fighting. But, as in the past, tense weeks gave way to an uneasy status quo, punctuated by familiar militant attacks. Once again, in 2025, hundreds of millions watched the deadly back and forth, waiting anxiously for Pakistan's response as the nuclear-armed neighbours face off once again. Angus McIntosh, ABC News.
The community in Pakistani-controlled Kashmir, whose mosque was destroyed by an Indian airstrike, has condemned the assault. Locals in Muzaffarabad described fear and panic as the bombing began.
Suddenly, shelling started. I think 10 to 15 missiles hit here. We had a big mosque here where our elders, young children and students used to come here to pray and study in the madrasa. It has been destroyed in front of you. In the night, the entire neighbourhood was in fear and panic, and the entire population fled from here and there. We strongly condemn this cowardly attack by India.
We strongly condemn these cowardly actions of India, which attempted to carry out this action in the darkness of the night and targeted unarmed civilians who were not armed or had anything else, but were sleeping peacefully in their homes at night. We say that our morale can never be diminished due to these actions of India. Our hearts are certainly saddened by the martyrdom of our people, but our courage and determination have not diminished in any way.
Well, Pakistan says it will respond to these strikes by India, but didn't provide any further details. So, are they imminent? Maleha Lodhi is Pakistan's former ambassador to the United Nations, and she joins me live now from Islamabad. Maleha, good to have you back on the program. Now, firstly, is it fair to say from a Pakistani point of view that this retaliation from India was always going to happen?
Well, that's the whole point, that every so many years, India decides to cross the border and either lob missiles across the border or undertake airstrikes. And I think what Pakistan will want to do this time round is to re-establish deterrence. It will want to ensure that India's actions to violate international law and violate its borders doesn't become the new normal, which is why Pakistan has said it reserves the right to respond. It's already responded by downing these 5 aircraft, as you know. It has also destroyed a number of Indian posts along the line of control. But this is not regarded as sufficient. So I think we're going to see more action in the days to come.
Yes, and how do you expect that action to materialize? And is that what you're talking about in terms of deterrence?
Well, one thing Pakistan will not do, which the Indians have done, which is to target civilians. The idea is not to inflict that kind of pain or punishment on the people, but to focus on military targets. But I'm not aware of the exact nature and scope of Pakistan's retaliation.
Now, what do we know about these general areas that were targeted? Muzaffarabad and Kotli in Pakistan-administered Kashmir and Bahawalpur in Punjab province of Pakistan. Are they known to be sort of havens for terrorist organizations?
I mean, if there's a country that's accusing you, they can claim terrorists are anywhere. But I think the point here is to see the evidence. Where is the evidence to indicate that there were terrorist launch pads or terrorist havens in any part of the places or the sites where India bombed? In fact, 26 civilians lost their lives. These were not terrorists. Women and children, they were not terrorists. So I think the onus is on India to explain why it targeted these places and what did it achieve?
You were talking about the possibility that Pakistan will strike back, but not to civilian targets. What might it target in India?
Well, it's very hard for me to speculate on that. I think we have to wait and see. But I do think we should also take note of behind-the-scenes diplomacy that's going on right now. As you know, the United States has been involved and engaged in trying to urge restraint on both sides. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has spoken more than once to officials in both India and Pakistan. And after the Indian attack, Mr. Rubio spoke again to Indian and Pakistani officials. Again, the message was restraint. And I think we should also recall that in the last 4 crises that India and Pakistan have seen in the last 20-25 years, it was the United States every time that came in as a kind of a fire brigade to defuse the crisis.
Now, what do you make, I mean, in terms of groups like Lashkar-e-Taiba, groups like Jaish-e-Mohammed, these are groups that have been operating there. It's well known. It's also been acknowledged by the Pakistani government. And, you know, we heard from the information minister about a week ago in that interview with Sky News, admitting pretty much that, you know, it is perhaps in some way providing support for the groups and saying in terms of what he had to say, that they're doing the, quote, dirty work for the West, for the US and the UK. What do you make of that?
Well, I know that the defense minister said something along those lines, but I think the important issue for us is that there is an unresolved issue, unresolved dispute in Kashmir between India and Pakistan. They've gone to war over Kashmir several times. They've had crises several times. India has a certain narrative. Pakistan has a different narrative. So really the need is for the two countries to re-engage, to find a diplomatic solution to this. Otherwise, this will go on and on and on. And it doesn't really benefit either side, frankly. So I'm certainly hoping that once this crisis is diffused, some kind of a back channel is restored or established between the two countries that are able to address the issues of concern to both sides. Clearly, yes, terrorism is the issue which is of concern to India. The unresolved nature of the Kashmir dispute is what is Pakistan's top priority. And then, of course, there are other issues and disputes that divide the two countries. No, there's no substitute for dialogue. I mean, the two countries can't keep lobbing missiles at each other every 3 years or airstrikes against each other, whatever the case is. Military confrontation between two nuclear neighbors is fraught with huge risk. And even as I speak, that risk is there because either side can make a miscalculation, and then we can have an uncontrolled escalatory spiral, which nobody is able to control.
Is this risk of a possible nuclear response perhaps the most unprecedented since independence, I suppose?
Well, I think both countries, since both countries went nuclear, have realized and recognized and acknowledged the limits of what they can do militarily. And not want to provoke a bigger crisis or an all-out conflict. So nuclear deterrence in that sense has worked. There has been no all-out war between the two countries since 1971. But again, I would say, we can't be sanguine about these things. We can't take these things for granted. And therefore, there's a need for a dialogue, for a nuclear dialogue, for a dialogue that addresses or tries to address the disputes that divide the two countries.
Okay, Maleha Lodhi, we'll leave it there, but thank you very much for speaking to us today. Well, let's recap the latest developments in our special coverage tonight. In the past few minutes, India's defense minister has said no civilian population was impacted by airstrikes fired into Pakistani-controlled territory. That's contested by Pakistani officials who say those strikes have killed at least 26 people, including civilians. The strikes were in retaliation for an attack on Indian tourists in Indian-administered Kashmir last month, which killed 26 mostly Indian nationals. Politically, there's been broad-based support in India for the military strikes in Pakistan. And a short time ago, opposition Indian National Congress MP Shashi Tharoor told the ABC that India was right to launch these strikes.
They're justified because of the fact that, yet again, Pakistan-based terrorists, almost certainly armed, financed and guided from Pakistan, have come to our country and killed innocent civilians. In this case, 26 people, just ordinary tourists in a place called Pahalgam in Kashmir. And they've done this repeatedly. There have been at least 15 incidents in the last 25 years of this century in which more than 20 civilians have been killed. The world knows about the horrors of 26/11 in Mumbai in 2008, when we had 170 people being butchered by Pakistani terrorists. The script is tiresomely predictable. They deny every time any responsibility until, of course, the evidence is conclusively established. In that particular instance, it was a case of one of the terrorists being captured alive, and Pakistan had to admit he was one of theirs. We've seen Pakistan brazenly denying they even knew where Osama bin Laden was until the Americans found him being hidden in a Pakistani military cantonment. This is the pattern there. This is a state that sponsors terrorism in the most vile manner, and a response absolutely had to be issued in order to make it clear there's a price to be paid for this kind of conduct. I think the Indian public expected no less, and I believe that what India did was a very sensibly calibrated response, where they were careful, first of all, to avoid collateral damage by striking at night, striking buildings which were known to be headquarters of wanted militant and terrorist groups, most of which have been proscribed by the United Nations Security Council. So these headquarters, known to be in Pakistan, were attacked, but very few casualties amongst the civilian population because the attacks were at 1 o'clock at night. And at the same time, the Indians showed self-restraint in not attacking Pakistani government or military installations in order to deny Islamabad an excuse to go up the escalatory ladder. I think this is, broadly speaking, a kind of way of saying we are responding to terrorism, but we are not interested in creating a protracted conflict. And I think that message has been understood by many countries who have shown some sympathy for India's situation.
That was the Indian opposition MP there, Shashi Tharoor. Now, India says this military offensive, dubbed Operation Sindoor, was targeting two established terrorist groups that have long operated out of Pakistani territory. Now, Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed have been listed as terrorist organizations by the Australian government and others worldwide. Now, here's what we know about them. The first is Lashkar-e-Taiba, Sunni extremist group that is based in Pakistan and uses violence in pursuit of its objectives and has more than a dozen camps within the country. One of its objectives is to unite Indian-administered Kashmir with Pakistan under a radical interpretation of Islamic law. Its broader mission is to establish an Islamic caliphate across the Indian subcontinent. And the other group is Jaish-e-Mohammed, which is also a Sunni Islamist extremist outfit, but reportedly much smaller in size to Lashkar-e-Taiba, but with similar objectives. That includes the use of violence to force Indian troops to withdraw from Kashmir. Its ultimate goal is to have the entire Jammu and Kashmir region under Pakistan's control. Dr. Ajai Sahni is the Executive Director of the Institute for Conflict Management and South Asia Terrorism Portal. He joins me now from New Delhi. Good to have you with us. Ajai, now firstly, do you believe India's strikes were able to hit these two terrorist organizations that were targeted, Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed, as what the Indian military was describing?
There is some visual evidence now coming in that the facilities have been hit, substantially damaged. Whether or not there was significant occupation of these facilities at the time of attack is, of course, in question as yet. We would have to wait for more evidence on that.
Yes, and what do you know about the strengths of these groups, and do you believe that they aided in the attack in Pahalgam 2 weeks ago?
Well, the attack in Pahalgam 2 weeks ago is attributed not to both the groups, but essentially to the Lashkar-e-Taiba. Through its front, so-called the resistance front. These are the two groups, Lashkar being the much stronger of the two, that have been creating perhaps the gravest amount of damage on the ground in Jammu Kashmir. As far as Jammu Kashmir itself is concerned, on the ground they have a very small number of cadre operating. Nevertheless, their strength in Pakistan is likely in the thousands. They have open recruitment camps. They have open participation in public events. So it's a very large group. It's a very publicly operating group, though it operates, of course, under a range of fronts, which are essentially humanitarian fronts. It's the Jamaat-ud-Dawa, which is also a banned organization, the Falah Insaniyat Trust. These are all names under which they collect funds for terrorism, they recruit, they propagate their ideology.
Yes, and to what degree do you think these terrorist organizations are linked or supported by the powers to be in Pakistan, be it the military or its intelligence services, the ISI?
I think there has been, through these decades of operation, no doubt in the minds of any intelligence organization across the world, that these are nothing more than the instrumentalities of the Pakistani army and the inter-services intelligence.
So, I mean, all this was kicked off, at least by the Pahalgam attacks. Why do you think India was not able to preempt that from an intelligence point of view?
I don't think it is possible ever to come to a situation of zero risk of terrorism. We've had attacks across the world in some of the most sophisticated, most securitized societies of the world. There will always be a vulnerability to terrorism, especially if you have a neighbor actively sponsoring, supporting terrorism on your soil.
Yes.
I don't regard this as an extraordinary intelligence failure. After the event, every terrorist incident is a failure, of course. But should this have been predicted? Could this have been predicted? Well, in that case, we would have no terrorism in the world because everything should and could have been predicted.
Yes. And now the final question I have for you, Ajai, is, will Indian-administered Kashmir, at the very least, ever be safe, in the years to come, given how the Modi government has opened it up much more since the abrogation of Article 370 back in 2019?
I don't think the abrogation of 370 has anything to do with the security situation in Kashmir. The security situation in Kashmir as it prevails today has been very substantially created by the security forces and the improving efficiency of their operations. If anything, we have become, when you say, will Kashmir ever be safe or secure? The answer is, well, we used to have 4,000 plus fatalities in a single year in 2001. We had 127 fatalities last year. So we are very, very much more safe and secure in Jammu and Kashmir today. Is it perfectly safe? Do we have zero terrorism as the government claims? I think those are exaggerated, boastful claims. They are not what you would call a security assessment. They are vulnerabilities. Those vulnerabilities will remain as long as Pakistan continues to support this movement, despite the fact that it has almost completely died on Kashmiri soil.
Okay, Dr. Ajai Sahni in New Delhi, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you for having me.
And that's where we'll leave our special coverage on the escalating conflict between India and Pakistan. And more news and our interviews can be found on our ABC's YouTube channel. And we'll continue covering the story here on the news channel as it develops in the coming hours.